According to Grandview Research, the DevOps market continues to grow with a market size that is expected to reach $12.8 billion by 2025. Global development teams today are taking real advantage of the many benefits the DevOps approach brings to the table, including better software quality, lower development costs, and reduced time to market, to name just a few. With several years of experience under their belts, DevOps teams looking to further improve project outcomes are now adopting what's being called a disciplined DevOps approach. This new twist on DevOps brings a more disciplined approach to projects by adding a greater level of control over development processes, ultimately leading to successful projects that deliver effective outcomes for teams and enterprises alike. This program features guest expert Bob Aiello, a consultant and author with more than 25 years of experience as a technical manager at leading financial services firms with company-wide responsibility for CM, ALM, and DevOps. He serves on the IEEE Software Standards Management Board, where he is heading up an effort to integrate DevOps principles and practices with IEEE and ISO industry standards. There are several teaching points in this program. First, we'll define disciplined DevOps and explain what it's all about. Next, we'll hear about the scope of disciplined DevOps and its advantages. Then, a discussion about how teams can implement a disciplined DevOps approach. We'll conclude with a look to the future and added advice from our expert, Bob Aiello. Now, let's begin our report. Though developers the world over have sung the praises of the DevOps development approach for several years now, the sheer demand for more and more frequent software releases have exposed weaknesses in more than a few DevOps strategies. To get the ship back on course, a more disciplined approach, i.e., disciplined DevOps, is required. A white paper published by Plutora, an enterprise release management tool provider, defines disciplined DevOps as an approach to software release collaboration that blends agile delivery with risk management and governance that support delivery assurance. The white paper goes on to say that disciplined DevOps is the streamlining of IT solution development and IT operations activities, along with supporting enterprise IT activities such as security and data management, to provide more effective outcomes to an organization. With those ideas in mind, let's turn now to our guest expert, Bob Aiello, for his perspectives on the rise of disciplined DevOps.
So DevOps evolved very much in the world of the developers, and in some cases it is the wild, wild west. But many larger organizations like big banks and other firms with regulatory requirements are starting to embrace DevOps principles and practices. So they're needing a little bit of guidance. How do you do DevOps when you actually have to pass an audit, when you actually have to comply with regulatory rules? So DevOps has been largely the focus in the development community, certainly some influence from ops, but what we're starting to see is the big players, the big banks and other big organizations need to have a little more disciplined approach to DevOps to be able to realize its benefits, but still follow all the rules in their industry.
Aiello then offered a more specific example as to why discipline is a key success factor for development projects utilizing a DevOps approach.
One of the considerations is in any industry that you're in, whether it's medical, pharmaceutical, or transportation, or in the financial services, big banks, there are regulatory requirements. For banks, it might be the Section 404 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. For medical pharmaceutical, it could be HIPAA and CFR 21. In any of these industries, they have regulatory requirements. So the goal here is to be able to realize the benefits of DevOps and Agile and other best practices while still being able to meet all those regulatory and compliance requirements. So disciplined DevOps is really about the whole notion of realizing these benefits while still ensuring that you follow all the rules for that particular industry.
So does DevOps need to be a more disciplined process? Wasn't the agility and collaboration that the DevOps approach brings to development projects enough? Aiello explains.
So in an ideal world, DevOps is in fact balance between development and operations, but it's not just Dev and Ops, right? It's also the QA and testing team, it's the security team. Really, DevOps is about every team in your organization, especially the customer, being able to share their view, their priorities, and help govern us so that we get to the right place, balancing speed and agility. So it's not just getting to where we need to be fast, it's getting there without making mistakes, without having outages or problems. So in disciplined DevOps, we have to think about the benefits of DevOps and in some cases Agile, and still be able to make sure that we follow all the rules for that particular industry.
We know that it takes not only discipline, but also teamwork, effective processes, and great strategies to deliver successful software projects. Without these key factors, your IT department might turn into the Wild West.
So DevOps today is often the Wild, Wild West. And I've been to a lot of conferences where the speakers talk about the benefits of having application build, package, and deploy in a very rapid basis. And they almost seem to forget that many industries require segregation of duties between the developers and the operations team. And I've been at some conferences in New York City where the whole audience was from the banking industry, but the speakers seemed to be talking about developers pushing their own code into production, completely ignoring the fact that everybody in the audience has to follow a segregation of duties. So there's DevOps principles and practices, and there's techniques that we can use, but we have to often balance the regulatory requirements, the requirements for audit, making sure that we follow all those rules and yet still get all the speed and agility that we can out of practices like DevOps and, for that matter, Agile as well.
Our guest expert then talked about the need for balance between speed and discipline as key success factors in DevOps projects.
DevOps was originally championed largely by the developers who wanted to be able to deal with the fact that a lot of times operations wasn't always able to keep up with them. So a lot of the DevOps practices are very much developer focused. In fact, I've been in meetings with large organizations where we're supposed to talk about DevOps, and as we go around the room, I got 30 people in the room, and it turns out every one of them is a developer. Ops wasn't there. So one of the problems that we are having is having the right balance between the speed as well as the discipline and understanding how the system is going to behave in production. So I think one of the challenges that we face is making sure that we have the right representation from all of the key stakeholders. And don't forget the users. It's not just Dev and Ops. It's also the QA and testing group. It's the security group. And a lot of times it's the product managers and the user representatives who help us decide what kind of risk is acceptable to the end user. So there's a need for speed and agility, but that also has to be balanced by managing the risk of making changes and perhaps dropping the football when you do make those changes. So considering all the stakeholders is a really important way to be able to get the right balance.
The term no-ops is used to describe a situation where developers do not engage operations professionals as they should during a project. Aiello explains why this can cause significant problems.
Unfortunately, DevOps has also been used by some developers as a means to bypass operations and the controls involved with operations. In fact, some folks are talking about this as being no ops, so that there's no operations team. Everything is managed by development. Now, part of that is because we can rely a lot more on automation and robotics, and that's great, but sometimes you also need to have an operations function that understands how the system behaves in production. Too often developers know how the system behaves on their laptop, but they're not as familiar with the production needs in a real environment where you have thousands of users and you start having to scale up. So DevOps needs to maintain that balance, and one of the things that I'm seeing is way too much focus on developer productivity and not the equal focus on how do we work in production. Now, that is coming out from some site reliability efforts that are going on, and that's a key area for us to consider, but the important thing is we balance both the needs of the developers and operations, as well as all the other stakeholders involved. And that's really where taking a disciplined approach can yield the right benefits.
Aiello summarized the advantages for those organizations who embrace a disciplined DevOps mindset.
So the advantages of a disciplined DevOps mindset is getting the right balance, speed, agility, and also understanding risk and controls. So we have to be sure that we consider all aspects of this in a balanced way. So speed is really important, agility is really important, but also site reliability is very important. We have to make sure we get that right balance. So in some organizations that I've seen, it becomes a little bit dysfunctional, where it's almost a political fight now between the developers and the operations team. And the operations team is kind of outgunned a bit because the developers have the knowledge and the capabilities, and in many cases they're overruling the operations team, which it's true the operations team needs to catch up and have the same technical skills. But at the end of the day, we're still seeing large system outages from the airlines to retail. We're still seeing lots of situations where systems get penetrated by hackers and no one has recognized the fact that the system has been tampered with, and there's just no excuse for that. We should be able to immediately tell that a system has been tampered with and be able to self-heal the code very, very quickly. So the results are pretty apparent in the industry as we still see lots of glitches and problems and security vulnerabilities. So disciplined DevOps helps us to think about how we're going to balance speed, agility, and still have the right controls in place so that our systems are secure and reliable.
We were curious if Aiello thought that the disciplined DevOps approach could somehow change or influence IT's relationship with the business.
So the business plays a really key role here, and this is something that I've learned from the trenches, really, and it almost surprised me. A lot of times the business will push us to take more risk than I would have thought of, and that's really a valuable lesson. So I'm always looking to have the business help me determine how much risk is acceptable. Sometimes getting to market fast enables the business to get a competitive advantage. Even if the software and the system is not 100% perfect, they want to be first to market to be able to gain that competitive advantage, even if we have to deal with some challenges along the way. So I find the business often gives us the right appetite for understanding risk and reward. So when you consider DevOps, it's not just about dev and ops, it's about all the stakeholders that can help you be successful, and business plays a key role in that.
In a recent article published by the Disciplined Agile Consortium, the governing body for certification in Disciplined Agile, they reference 3 critical success factors for organizations who are adopting a disciplined DevOps approach. They are as follows. First, build a collaborative and respectful culture across your entire IT organization. People and the way that they work together are the primary determinants of success when it comes to adopting a disciplined DevOps strategy. Second, focus on people, but don't forget process and tooling. The consortium reminds us that DevOps is primarily a mindset, but there is a large number of potential practices, strategies that you need to consider adopting. The third critical success factor recommended by the consortium is that choice is good. They note that no single approach is perfect, and no single approach works in all situations. You not only need to have choices, it's incredibly good to have choices. With those 3 success factors in mind, let's return to our expert, Bob Aiello. Here, Aiello offers his thoughts on whether industry standards and frameworks would be a help or a hindrance to the DevOps approach.
So right now there is no standard for DevOps in the industry, and frankly I don't think there should be one. Understanding DevOps is as much about culture as it is about anything else. So there are technical practices and certainly key principles that you have to consider, but we don't really have a standard for DevOps, and frankly many of us think that there shouldn't be a DevOps standard per se. But what we do have is industry standards bodies like the IEEE and ISO are starting to develop guidance that if you are following industry best practices, if you are following standards, here's how you do DevOps and Agile in a regulatory environment. So one example is the IEEE P2675 DevOps standard that is focused on building secure and reliable software, focusing on build, package, and deploy, both of the system as well as the application. So there are standards in the industry that are evolving that help us to do DevOps in a regulatory environment. But that doesn't mean they're defining DevOps. What they're defining is how to do DevOps in that particular environment. So if you're building an airplane, if you're building a train, here are the practices that you need to embrace so that you're following all the right standards and frameworks and still getting the benefit from DevOps or Agile for that matter.
DevOps is rapidly becoming mainstream in the software development industry today, if it's not there already. Enterprises are anxious to embrace DevOps because of its many advantages. Our guest expert talked about the broad scope of the disciplined DevOps approach.
So the scope of disciplined DevOps has to be full lifecycle and has to be full organization. So you really have to think about the whole ecosystem. You know, in DevOps, we take a systems view. It's very important to take a systems view of the whole organization. How do each of the different parts of your organization function? And a lot of times I'm working in a DevOps fashion as a facilitator. Even though it's not as a technical function, we're still helping different teams understand different perspectives. So DevOps is really taking a much broader focus, and that's really important. And also, it's important to consider a full life cycle. You have to think about how did you develop your requirements? Did you start thinking about testing up front? How did you handle your architecture? How did you handle evolving an enterprise architecture? So DevOps is not just about building the software and shipping it, although that's really critical. It's about the whole life cycle. You know, one of the key areas is, did you retire all the software components that are no longer needed? Deleting code off your servers is just as important as putting the right code on there, because if you leave old deprecated code on your servers, we've seen that often as a source of security issues, and hackers can actually utilize old software to be able to penetrate a system. So DevOps has to consider the whole organization, the whole system, as well as the whole life cycle.
So, are you ready to implement DevOps but are unsure about where to begin? Expert Bob Aiello offers this roadmap to success.
Well, I always suggest that you start by assessing your existing best practices, but then also compare them to the guidance that you find in well-defined industry standards and frameworks. And whatever industry you're in, you may be governed by different industry standards and frameworks, but there's a lot of guidance in there, and it can be very helpful to consider that. But you have to start by understanding where you are today. What are the practices that you have today in place? And I always tell other practitioners, we have to have the respect for an organization to understand the things they're doing today are there for a reason. So start with assuming that people are doing the right thing and they got to this place for all the right reasons, but then start to consider, how do we iteratively improve what we're doing? One of the things to consider is we can't stop the train. We can't just stop what everybody's doing. I mean, DevOps in many cases grew up with 3 guys in a dorm room starting a new internet website, and that's great. You know, that's greenfield. But in my world, I'm more often working with a big bank or another large organization, and I have to help them iteratively improve without stopping what they're doing. They still have to serve their customers. They still have to run their business. So we're often taking a very agile, iterative approach to implementing these best practices. And the place to start by assessing is assessing where you are right now and iteratively improving your techniques.
According to a research study sponsored by solution provider Puppet and the team at DevOps Research and Assessment, high-performing organizations deploy 200 times more often with much faster lead times. Great results indeed, but for many organizations, workflow change is difficult, and therefore implementing a disciplined DevOps approach will present a significant challenge. What to do? Bob Aiello offers this advice.
So the next thing to do is to really be able to paint the picture where you want to be. So some basic things that I always tell people is prove to me you have the right code in production, identify any unauthorized changes, and be able to have a system that can effectively self-heal. And there's really no reason today why your software can't self-identify that it's been tampered with and actually self-heal, still following all of your controls such as change control. So the first step is to understand what are your current practices, are they where they should be right now? And then when you find gaps, we start to make plans to be able to iteratively improve things step by step. So one thing that you might start off with is improving the way that you're doing testing. So you might be able to left shift your testing and get more testing done in the beginning of the process. If you wait to the very end, then that's really a loss. So being able to left shift a lot of your best practices. Another thing is to make sure that you deploy your code the same way to all of your environments. Many organizations fail where they have a great way to deploy their code to development test environments. They're using continuous integration servers. They can build, package, and deploy super fast in the lower environments. And then when they go to production, they drop the ball. So using the exact same techniques across all of your environments is very, very important. And being able to prove the code got there correctly, that it's still intact, that it hasn't been tampered with, and then be able to have an automated process to fix the code if anything has been tampered with or any mistakes have been made causing your code baselines to not be where they should be. You should have the techniques in place to very quickly fix those issues.
In this report, expert Bob Aiello defined disciplined DevOps and explained why organizations should consider adopting a disciplined DevOps mindset. He then offered advice on getting started and implementing a disciplined DevOps approach. Next, we'll conclude with a look at the current state of DevOps and what changes may be on tap in the coming years. Once again, guest expert Bob Aiello.
I think DevOps has really evolved in many ways. Frankly, these practices existed in configuration management too, but DevOps has put a nice bow around a lot of these practices. They've done a good job of marketing it, developing interest in it. So today, organizations all expect that you have a DevOps function, and configuration management is a key part of that. So I think in many ways it's raised awareness. It's helped organizations understand that deployment is really a key capability, and there's no excuse anymore for not being able to roll out security patches to all of your servers very, very quickly when a security vulnerability is seen. And that's been something that has plagued the industry quite a bit. In many cases, organizations know they have a security vulnerability, and they can't push those patches out to their servers in a very quick way. So DevOps helps us with those capabilities and allows us to be more responsive, delivering both new functions as well as maintaining the security and reliability of the existing systems.
Aiello concluded with this look to the future.
I see these practices evolving even further and allowing us to be able to do more rapid systems and applications build, package, and deploy. I see our security improving. I think we have to consider that while hackers are also getting more creative, we have to get better at being able to keep these systems secure and reliable. But I think those techniques are in place, and I think they're getting more and more mature every day. I think organizations that have not yet evolved to be able to embrace these best practices, they're going to be under a lot of pressure to be able to have the right practices in place. And there's almost no excuse now that if your credit card information is exposed to hackers, I think consumers are realizing that that was a huge miss by a company, and it's no longer acceptable to be making those kind of mistakes. We have the right techniques in place. We know how to do this the right way, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to have the right DevOps and configuration management practices in place, and there's really no excuse anymore. So I think consumers are becoming more demanding. I think the industry is becoming more expecting that we have the right practices in place, and that's really where it should be.
That concludes our report, Understanding Disciplined DevOps. We'd like to thank our guest expert, Bob Aiello, for sharing his expertise and advice on this critically important topic. This is Michael Quinlan reporting, and thanks for watching.